Imagine you haven't eaten in 2 days. You know exactly where the herd is. You tracked it yesterday, found the prints, mapped the route in your head, and now all you have to do is get there. And then it starts raining. Not a light drizzle, a heavy, soaking, wind-driven rain that doesn't stop. It goes all day, then all night, then the next morning, and it's still going, so now you can't hunt. You can't see tracks because the mud washed them away. You can't move through the open because wet ground and bare feet on rocky terrain means a twisted ankle. And a twisted ankle out here means death. The river near your camp is rising, and the fire, the one thing keeping you warm, keeping predators away, and keeping you alive, is starting to struggle. You're not bored. You're trapped. Here's the thing most people don't think about. The moments when ancient humans couldn't act might be the moments that made us who we are. What they did when they were stuck inside, cold, wet, and going nowhere, that's the story almost nobody tells. And by the end of this video, you're going to see the entire arc of human civilization differently because it didn't start on a clear, sunny day with a perfect hunt. A huge piece of it started in the dark, in the rain, waiting for the storm to pass. But first, let's talk about what that storm was actually doing to them, because it wasn't just annoying. It was lethal in at least 3 specific ways. Keeping one flame alive through extended rain was the ultimate test of prehistoric survival, and for good reason. A wet human loses body heat up to 25 times faster than a dry one. Without waterproof shelter or real clothing, a long rainstorm in anything below about 50 degrees Fahrenheit could push your core temperature into hypothermia range within hours. And most of the places our ancestors lived got that cold at night, even in Africa during the wet season at higher elevations. Then there's flooding. Caves and rock shelters, the main places people lived, are often at the base of hillsides or near rivers. Heavy rain meant flash floods. Archaeologists have found thick layers of flood sediment inside occupied caves, meaning the water came in while people were living there. Some of those caves were never used again after that. And the third threat, maybe the worst one, is predators. Rain drove animals into shelter too, and sometimes that shelter was the same cave you were in. There are sites in South Africa where human remains and large cat remains are found in the same layers. And some of those humans have puncture marks in their skulls that match leopard teeth. So rain didn't just make life uncomfortable, it compressed the entire world, humans, predators, prey, all squeezed into the same small dry spaces at the same time. And right in the middle of all of that, one job mattered more than anything else: keeping the fire going. This is where it gets genuinely unsettling. And it's the part I want you to hold on to because we're going to come back to it. For a huge portion of human prehistory, most people probably couldn't start a fire from scratch. There's evidence of controlled fire use going back at least 400,000 years at Kesem Cave in Israel, and possibly as far back as 1,000,000 years at Wonderwork Cave in South Africa. But controlling a fire that already exists and creating one from nothing are 2 completely different skills. If your fire went out during a storm, you might not be able to relight it. So some groups actually carried fire with them. They transported smoldering embers wrapped in green leaves or packed inside a woody fungus called tinder fungus, which could catch a spark and smolder inside itself for hours, basically a biological lighter. And we know this wasn't just guesswork, because when they found Ötzi the Iceman, the 5,300-year-old frozen man preserved in the Alps, he was carrying a complete fire kit in his belt pouch: tinder fungus, flint, iron pyrite for striking sparks, and backup plant tinder. Even 5,000 years ago, losing your fire was serious enough that people built dedicated equipment to prevent it. So when rain hit, the first priority wasn't shelter. It was the fire. Move it deeper into the cave, shield it with hides or brush, find dead lower branches from coniferous trees, the ones still protected by the canopy above, usually still dry underneath. Split open wet logs to get at the dry wood inside. Use birch bark as kindling because birch contains a chemical called betulin that burns even when wet. One person's entire job during a rainstorm might have been just sitting next to that fire for hours, feeding it, shielding it, making sure it didn't die. Because that fire was everything: warmth, light, safety, cooked food, and the center of every social interaction the group had. Letting it go out wasn't just careless, it was potentially fatal for everyone. All right, so the fire is going, you're mostly dry, but you cannot leave. So what do you actually do with all that time? You make things. The archaeological record is very clear on this. Caves and rock shelters are packed with evidence of manufacturing. Stone tools in every stage of production, piles of tiny flaking chips concentrated in specific spots inside caves, exactly where someone would sit near firelight and work for hours. But it goes well beyond stone tools. Excavations at Blombos Cave in South Africa revealed a processing workshop where a liquefied ochre-rich mixture was produced and stored in two abalone shells 100,000 years ago. Ochre, bone, charcoal, grindstones, and hammerstones all formed part of this production toolkit. This wasn't basic survival. This was a system. Someone sat in that cave and manufactured pigment on purpose, with dedicated tools and a process. The conceptual ability to source, combine, and store substances that enhance technology or social practices represents a benchmark in the evolution of complex human cognition. And then there are bone needles, which start appearing in the record around 61,000 years ago in South Africa and later across Europe and Asia. These are delicate, precise tools with tiny drilled eyes. You don't make a bone needle while you're running from something. You make it when you're sitting still, focused, with hours to spare. Rainy days gave people that time. Now here's where it gets really interesting, and this connects directly back to that question I planted at the beginning, about what the storm was actually building. At a Neanderthal site in France, archaeologists found a tiny fragment of twisted plant fiber string, dating back tens of thousands of years, the oldest direct evidence of string ever found. And at Hohlerfels Cave in Germany, they discovered a 35,000-year-old tool carved from mammoth ivory with 4 holes and spiral grooves, designed specifically for twisting plant fibers into rope. Someone sat in that cave and carved a dedicated rope-making machine. Making rope is slow, repetitive, and requires patience. It's the perfect bad weather task. And rope changed everything. It let you tie things together, build better shelters, create snares and traps, bind tools to handles. An enormous amount of human technology runs on string, and string was almost certainly invented by someone stuck inside waiting for the rain to stop. People were also making their shelters livable in ways that genuinely surprise most people. At Sibadu Cave in South Africa, around 77,000 years ago, people constructed plant bedding from sedges and other plants topped with aromatic leaves containing insecticidal and larvicidal chemicals. In the earliest layer, 77,000 years old, the team found the leaves of Cryptocarya woodii, also known as Cape laurel, an aromatic plant whose leaves contain several chemical compounds that can kill insects. The researchers suggest early humans chose them specifically to protect against mosquitoes and other pests. Beginning around 73,000 years ago, the bedding was burned, presumably for site maintenance, so they could lay down fresh layers. Someone wasn't just surviving in that cave, they were making it home. 77,000 years ago, people were already doing pest control. If you're finding this as fascinating as I do, hit subscribe right now, because we go deep on exactly this kind of thing every single week. And drop a comment below. What surprises you most about how our ancestors actually lived? The algorithm loves that stuff, and honestly, so do I. But here's where the story takes a turn that nobody expects. Because all of that, the tools, the rope, the bedding, that's the practical stuff. What came next is something else entirely. The Chauvet Cave in southern France contains paintings roughly 36,000 years old. Lions, horses, rhinos, bears, drawn with a level of skill and observation that still shocks researchers today. The artists understood anatomy, movement, perspective. Some of the animals are drawn mid-stride, muscles tensed, heads turning. These aren't doodles. These are the work of people who watched these animals for thousands of hours and then recreated them from memory, deep underground by firelight. And Chauvet isn't alone. Lascaux, Altamira, and cave sites in Sulawesi, Indonesia, where figurative art dates back tens of thousands of years. But here's what makes this really interesting. These paintings aren't at the entrance of the cave where you'd sit for shelter. They're deep, sometimes hundreds of meters in, through narrow passages in chambers you'd have to crawl to reach. Someone carried animal fat lamps into total darkness and painted. Nobody does that when the weather's perfect and the hunting's good. You do that when you can't go outside, when the rain has been falling for 2 days and you've already sharpened every tool you own and there's nothing left to do but go deeper into the dark and create something. We can't prove that cave art was a rainy day activity, but the logic holds together. The most creative explosion in human prehistory happened in the exact places where people were most likely to be stuck inside for extended periods. And that leads to the part nobody talks about, the thing that might actually be the most important thing rain ever did for our species. Think about what happens when 15 to 30 people are forced into a confined space together for days with nothing to do. You talk. You listen. You share. Research comparing daytime conversations and nighttime fireside conversations among the Jew Huansi Bushmen of the Kalahari Desert found that during the day, people talked about practical things, land rights, resources, complaints. But at night, around the fire, over 80% of conversation shifted to stories, songs, and ceremonies. The firelight changed what people talked about. It softened faces, reduced tension, created a space where people opened up. The campfire wasn't just warmth. It was the original social network. And the stuff being shared around that fire wasn't small talk. It was survival, where water sources dry up in summer, which plants are safe to eat, where the best flint deposits are, how to track a specific animal. That's not gossip. That's critical knowledge moving from one brain to another through speech. And then beyond the practical stuff, there were stories. Myths, explanations for why the rain comes and where it goes. Every ancient culture on Earth has rain mythology, and someone invented those stories. They almost certainly did it while sitting in the exact situation the story was trying to explain. The oldest verified oral traditions, Australian Aboriginal stories describing sea level changes from roughly 7,000 years ago, survived for thousands of years through nothing but people telling them to each other over and over again. That kind of cultural memory doesn't develop unless groups spend enormous amounts of time doing exactly that. Sitting together, retelling stories, reinforcing and updating the group's collective memory. Rainy days weren't dead time, they were transmission time, the days when knowledge moved from the old to the young, when skills were taught by demonstration, when the group's shared understanding of the world got a little deeper. So here's where we land, and this is the thing I promised you at the start. The storm wasn't just a threat to survive, it was a forcing function. It took a group of people who would otherwise scatter across the landscape, hunting and foraging, and it locked them in a room together. And in that room, under pressure, with time on their hands and a fire to gather around, they made tools, made art, made rope, made medicine, made bedding, and made meaning. They told each other who they were and what they knew and what they believed. That's not just survival. That's civilization in its earliest form. The rain that sounds like background noise to you right now, the exact sound that makes you feel calm and sleepy, was the same sound that forced our ancestors into the most productive creative sessions in human history. Every time it rained, the world got a little smarter. If you want to keep going down this rabbit hole, the video on how ancient humans navigated without any tools is right there. And I promise it's just as surprising as this one. I'll see you in that one.